2 weeks down means that we are 1/3 of the way through the season. Teams are really starting to tighten up. Sets are being crafted. Games are getting hot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the NWBA Wonder Room episode 4, week 3. I am your host, King Vasser. Thank you for watching. Coming up on today's episode, we review all the action that's happened in week 2, unveil a brand new batch of power rankings, talk about the stat leaders, not only for last week, but also for the entire season thus far. We get into a very hectic free agency period, as well as some trades, and we look ahead to what's coming up in week 3. Don't go anywhere. Wonder Room starts now. All right, let's get right on into it. Week 2 has wrapped up. We have seen a bit of a shakeup in the standings from what's happened last week. At the top of Ruby League is now Akala Island after a perfect 4-0 week. New Moon Island and Sunny Shore right behind at 5-2. Lava Ridge sitting at 4-3. Treasure Town and Veilstone both at 3-4. Alfrenado 1-5-1. Yes, found a way to draw. And Lentamaz bringing up the rear at 1-6. Over in the Sapphire League, Mount Hokulani tops that league at 6-1. Mali Sid with a 5-1-1, very strong record. Humalau in 3rd place at 5-2. A gang of teams, Lavender Town, Burbank, and New Bark Town sitting at 3-4. And Humalau City and New Bark bringing up the rear at 1-6. We've seen a few teams shift here and there. Lava Ridge is the big one. Started 3-0. Had a pretty rough week, finds himself at 4-3 now. Meanwhile, Sunny Shore and Akala Island both putting off undefeated weeks, going up in the standings on their side. Sapphire League, fairly similar to what happened last week, with the exception of Humala, who went 2-2, so they find themselves at 3 as opposed to 1. But a lot of those teams are still very much bunched together. It was a really exciting week 2. It was the beginning of inter-league play, so you would have Ruby League and Sapphire League teams go head-to-head against each other. And we got some pretty interesting games that came out of this week. As far as games of the week, Mount Hokulani and Mali City put together a good 3-game set. It came down to the wire and some luck-based shenanigans. And 2 Versus Seeker matches, Humala versus Mount Hokulani and Akala Island versus Veilstone, both also 3-game sets. You can watch all 3 of those over on the YouTube channel, but this was a really, really exciting week. We had some really, really good sets. And some interesting results coming out of interleague play, that big one being New Bark Town and Humala City finding a way to beat Treasure Town, who started off 2-1, so those are, pretty big upsets. Mali City and Alfrenada, unfortunately, could not reach a time which both GMs could play, so they ended up drawing. That may or may not be pretty big for Mali City down the stretch, because that draw is going to throw a wrench into the standings, I would like to believe. We will only have to see from here. There's a lot more games left to play. So, we jump on into our Pokemon of the Week. For the Ruby League, that award goes to Quavel of Sunny Shore. Led the NWBA in KOs, points, and points per game for the week. 17 KOs, 35 points, 5.8 points per game. And was second over the course of the week with 2.8 KOs per game. Strongest week that we've seen from a single mon thus far offensively. Quavel had just its way with a lot of factions. I believe against Burbank, it had 10 KOs in one single set, so that was where the bulk of its work came in, but it still put in work in other sets, so that's how it got to 17 and 35 points. Had a few assists, rarely ever died. That's the type of week that every mon aspires to have, so that was a huge reason that Sunny Shore was able to go 4-0 over the course of the week. And there was some steep competition for this award too. Zamazenta H really threatened over New Moon. Even Mudsdale, Quavel's teammate, had a fairly strong case for Pokemon of the Week in week 2 over in the Ruby League. As for the Sapphire League, that award goes to Thunderous Eye of Mali City. 13 KOs, which was tied for third over the course of the week, 25 points, which was fourth, 5.0 points per game, which was also tied for third, and 2.6 KOs per game, which was third standalone in the league. Obviously, the numbers don't jump off the page, especially compared to Kukwavo, but again, the Ruby League had so many hitters that went off this week that Thunderous Eye still put together a great week, right? As you can see, top 4 in all those major stats. Just the fact that Sapphire League didn't have nearly as strong of a week as a whole as Ruby League, but that's still good enough to get Pokemon of the Week for Thunderous Eye. So that's huge for Mali City, who, thanks to the draw to Alfrenada, did not go 4-0, but still went undefeated at 3-0-1. And that big win over Mount Hokulani. So very impressive performance over there. We move on over into our power rankings. We have some shifts, some pretty notable ones too. At the top of the power rankings, you have Mount Hokulani, went 3-1 over the course of the week. Was 3-0 to start the season. Had some big wins, and their only losses against Mali City, a very strong team in its own right. So that gives Kami top bragging rights for the week. Akala Island in second place, 4-0 in week 2. Didn't have nearly as strong of a schedule to face as Mount Hokulani, but hey, 4-0 is 4-0. So that's more than good enough to get a top 3 spot for Akala Island, who sits at the top of Ruby League. Sunny Shore also went undefeated after what was a pretty surprising 1-2 start. Has more than cleaned up. In the meantime, they find themselves at number 3 as a result. Mali City, 5-1-1. They sit at fourth place. All 4 of those teams in the top 4 moved up in the power rankings. New Moon Island stands pat at number 5. Obviously, number 5 is a great place to be. Sitting at 5-2 with 3-1 over week 2. So, didn't have a standout performance enough to warrant it over, say, Mali City or Sunny Shore. But still, like I said, 3-1 is a great week for sure. And that's more than good enough to stay at 5th place. Humalau drops to number 6. Didn't drop too far. 6 is still a good place to be, but 2-2 week obviously doesn't compare to some of the top teams' performances over the past week. So that's why they sit at number 6. Lava Ridge, pretty rough week, 1-3. Not somewhere you want to be at all. Avery's sputtering a little bit, but was able to turn it around at the end of the week. Got a quick win to stay above 500. And because there are so many teams that sit below 500, that 1-3 week wasn't enough to sink them below 7th place. Obviously, the 5, 3, and 4 teams are all going to be bunched up together. As of now, Lavender Town holds that top spot among them at 8th place. Went 2-2, had a big win against New Moon Island, which was the biggest win out of any of the 3 and 4 teams, which is why they sit at number 8. Veilstone had a nice 2-2 week. Will trying to bounce back a little bit. Sits at 9th currently, so they moved up in the power rankings. Treasure Town, like I said, that very rough 1-3 week, including losses to Humalau City and Newbark Town. That matters a lot. You know, 2 teams with previously very bad records, and in Humalau City's case, still very bad. So that's why they drop all the way down to 10. Newbark Town moving up to 11 by virtue of their big win over Treasure Town, and a pretty solid week overall. CJ had a much better performance in week 2 than in week 1, so you know they're trying to make the push for a playoff spot. Obviously, it's still very early in the season, but you always got to think about your divisional matchups, and Newbark Town has been picking up some wins a little bit, and that's going to matter in the long run, obviously. And then Burbank, last out of all those teams, at 12th place, dropped down 1 spot. Didn't really have a bad performance at all. 2-2 is still perfectly fine. Just that the 3 and 4s are really hard to gauge right now. So Burbank just unfortunately has to hold that last spot. But realistically, 8 through 12 are all in the same place, and those are very interchangeable. So these power rankings in those spots don't really mean too much. Then there's a big gap between Burbank and the bottom 4. At 13th is Alfrenada, sitting at 1-5-1, 0-3-1, didn't get a single win. I know that Chris is on vacation right now, so it has been very difficult for him to participate in any capacity over the season. I believe 2 or even 3 sets were just at the mercy of forfeiture / draws. So tough week for Alfornada, and I believe Chris is going to be out all of week 3 as well. So that's going to be a pretty deep hole to have to try to dig out of. But I think that Chris is a pretty good GM, and you know, it's never over till it's over and can still find a way out. And that's why, even though obviously he's very low on the power rankings right now, 13 still isn't the absolute worst place to be. Down at 14th, Newbark Falls. Didn't get a single win in week 2. Had some decent performances. You know, had a few games that could have gone Rhino's way, but unfortunately just wasn't able to find the victory. So they sit at 1-6, and they sit at 14th in the power rankings. And then at the last 2 spots, the same as in week 2, Lentamaz and Humalel City. Both picked up wins, but in Lentamaz Town's case, there is a qualifier because the set they won was a set against Alfornada, which, if you did not know, was not a normal set, was instead a 1v1 metronome battle. No bans, didn't even use the mods that were on their roster. Can't necessarily blame Alfornada for trying to make that decision. You know, again, Chris is on vacation, so it's hard for him to play anything. So results in Lentamaz getting their first win of the season, but that also means that technically it's 1-6 asterisk, and they still have to find an actual legitimate set to win. And then Humalel City bring up the rear at 16. Their one win was a, some would say, fluky win. More of a Zebi lost that set than Trey won it, and then the rest of the week wasn't very strong as well. So that's why they sit at the bottom of the power rankings. Again, it's still week 3. A lot of change can happen, and nothing is set in stone yet. Nobody is, oh, they're going to make the playoffs, and nobody is eliminated from playoff contention yet. We still have so much more of the season to play through, but this is what the state of the NWBA looks as of right now for Season 5. Moving on to the weekly stat leaders. So, obviously, Coquable, as you can see, dominates this chart. Led the week in KOs with 17. Zamas at the 8, as I said before, was threatening for Pokemon of the week. Picked up 16 KOs for New Moon Island. A trio of Mons tied at 13 KOs. A very surprising Slowbro for Verbank. Muffin's been able to find a way to put together some offense for Slowbro. It's very odd, but very impressive nonetheless. The aforementioned Thunderous Eye from Mali City, and Greninja of Mount Hokulani, all tied for 3rd place with 13 KOs. For the assist leaderboard, Mudsdale led the charge with 13 for Sunny Shore. Certainly helps when Coquable is such a potent sweeper as it is. That helps to boost Mudsdale's numbers. Heatran returns to the leaderboard with 12 assists on the week. And Yuxi also returns with 10 assists on the week. Heatran and Yuxi, the only Mons that were on the weekly leaderboard for both week 1 and week 2. Which I think is pretty notable and a pretty cool indication of just how rapidly and quickly things can change over the course of the league. And how much matchups matter. Ting Lu for Humalao and Overquote for Mount Hokulani both putting up 7 assists, which has them tied for 4th over the course of the week. In terms of total points, Coquable leads the charge at 35, Zamazenta H and Mudsdale with 28, Thunderous Eye with 25, and a trio of Mons at 21 points over the course of the week. Those 3 being Greninja and Slowbro, as noted by the KO leaderboard, but also a 3rd Mon in Chestnut for Humalao. Kobu had some pretty good matches for Chestnut this week, despite the fact that it's meant to be a very defensive Mon. Chestnut was able to pick up a lot of KOs, and as such put up a 21-point week. Very impressive for a supposed to be defensive Mon. As for the points per game leaderboard, Coquable led the charge at 5.8 despite how many games it played, which is very impressive. Normally, these leaderboards are dominated by Mons that only played 2 or 3 games over the week, but they went absolutely off, and 3 of the next 4 Mons did exactly that. Dragonite for Humalao only played in 2 games, put up 5.5 points per game, didn't matter, picked up a lot of KOs, and put in mad work in the one set that I played over the course of the week. Tied At third with 5 points per game, Thunderous Eye, and Iron Hands of Kala Island. Same situation as Dragonite, only played one set but was able to pick up a total of 5 KOs, didn't die, and as a result, 5.0 points per game. Fair enough. And in 5th place, Volcanion of Newbark Town. Volcanion, a mon that doesn't really get to see the field much at all. It has been the most common ban on Newbark Town's team, but in the one set, it has been able to play thus far this season, put in some decent work. 4.7 points per game, can't complain about that at all. And then lastly, KOs per game leaderboard, Dragonite sitting at the top at 3, Quaquaval at 2.8, Thunderous Eye at 2.6, Iron Hands at 2.5, and also tied for 4th with 2.5 KOs per game, Phalanx of All for Nada. Chris only really got to play, I believe, 2 sets this week, but in one of those sets, was able to get Phalanx 5 KOs over the course of those 2 games. So Phalanx was able to put in some good work. It's always nice to see lower tier mons, PU and such, put up big numbers. So that's a joy to see Phalanx here in the weekly leaderboard. And now that we are more than 1 week into the season, we can talk about league leaders as a whole over the course of the entire season. For total KOs, 5 mons all sit at 22, being Cleavor, Veluza, Zamazenta, Quaquaval, and Basket Legion F. All tied at 22. In terms of total assists, Yuxi still leads at 21 now. Heatran right behind it at 19. Bronzong, even after its week 2 not being as strong as its week 1, still has 16. Mudsdale's big week puts it up to 4th now in the league at 14. And Tinglu for Humalau having 12. We're seeing a lot more assists than we have seen in the previous 2 seasons of the NWBA. Mostly because of how offensive the metagame has been. So I think that's cool to see that we're seeing mons put up assist numbers more reminiscent of what we saw in the first 2 seasons of the NWBA. Total deaths, obviously not necessarily a category that you want to lead in, but still fairly notable. Yuxi leads the way with 16, which makes sense. We've seen what Nico wants to do with it. Put up rocks, press memento, and let one of his many setup sweepers go to work. Charles Paldean Aqua for Newbark at 15. Low Kicks and Gastrodon of Lintamont's Town tied at 3rd with 13, and Landers T of Newbark also sitting there at 13. Been a rough season for Landers T. Back in previous seasons, known for having a very high KDA, or at the very least, able to put in a lot of work and not die very easily, but not such the case this season. It's been a rough going for one of the stalwarts of the NWBA. In terms of KOs per game, Quaquaval leads now at 2.2. Reggie Drago still very high at 2.1. And a few mons at 2.0 KOs per game. Chestnut, as I said before. Dragapult of Newbark. And 2 other mons, which I believe are Zamazenta and Basket Legion F. A lot of mons that are still putting up, multiple KOs per game. So not surprising to see quite a few mons sitting there at 2.0. In terms of assists per game, Bronzong still leads the way at 2.7 thanks to its massive week 1. Carbink, interestingly enough, at 2.0. So Valley City has been able to get some offense going, whether it be Bronzong or Carbink. One of them has been able to put up rocks and be good defense and wear the opposing teams down for someone like, say, Thunderous Eye to come in and clean up. Heatran, probably the most consistent of the assist setters, sitting at 1.5, which is good for 3rd place. Spidops, a new contender, sitting at 1.4 for Humala City. Spidops, a lot of people like to meme on that mon, but it can put up webs, it can put up hazards, and it can get some necessary tip for your team. So, 1.4 points assist per game, not bad at all. And then lastly, tied at 2 assists per game, you have a Yuxi, or tied at 1.2 assists per game, Yuxi and Mudsdale for New Moon and Sunny Shore. In terms of straight up points per game, Quaquaval leads at 4.2, Chestnut at 3.7, Reggie Drago at 3.6, and Volcanion Typhlosion H also at 3.6. Typhlosion H didn't really mention his name much at all this week, but still very high in points per game thanks to his week 1 performance. In terms of games played, we're starting to see some separation, and we're really starting to see which Mons are the crutches, so to speak, for their teams. You're going to see them every single set. Yuxi and Veluza lead the way with 17 games apiece. They have played every single game for New Moon Island. Iron Treads over in Veilstone with 16. And Overquill for Mount Hokulani. Tall Spade and Blaze for Lava Ridge. And Tall Spade and Aqua for New Bark at 16. All of those Mons have played every single game thus far this season. In terms of matches banned, Walking Wake and Amorous Eye both lead the way with 6. Interesting to note that they have been unbanned at least once. We have not seen a Mon that has been banned every single set thus far this season, and I think that's great. That people are trying to figure out ways to stop the supposed demons. Because we've seen in the past Mons like Melmetal, Kyurem, just never get to hit the field at all, and we're starting to see that change a little bit. Obviously, the rematch ban clause rule is going to affect us a lot in the future because there are going to be some of these Mons that will have to see the field. But it's cool that even early in the season, there hasn't been a single Mon that has never gotten playing time. And then tied at 3rd place with 5 each, Iron Valiant, Volcanion, and Dragapult. None of these are surprising. All of these make sense. In terms of total points, Cleavor still leads the way at 47. Still had a pretty solid week. I believe had 15 points this week, so that's still good enough to keep the lead. Quavo's Monster Week puts it up at 2nd now with 42. Teammate Zamazenta H and Veluza coming at 3rd and 4th with 38 and 37 respectively. And Reggie Drago sitting at 36 in 5th place for Treasure Town. KDA, this is always a fun stat because this one is really more about what Mons get to matchup check. So as you can see at the top with 7 in KDA, Dragonite for Yuma and Go-Goat for Akala Island. I mentioned earlier it's always cool to see lower tiers be able to get some shine, and we have seen that there are a few lower tier Mons, or at least Mons that you don't really think are that dangerous, able to collect a lot of KOs or a lot of assists and just not die because they only come in when the matchup is perfect. At 6 KDA, you have Chestnut, again after its very big week, and then Quavel and Toxtricity both at 5 in 4th place. And then lastly, usage rate, which is essentially your contribution to your faction success, which is basically a formula that incorporates games played as opposed to total games played for your faction, the amount of KOs you have compared to the rest of the KO, total KOs in your team, and assists compared to total assists in your team. So you will normally see the Mons that play the most games, get the most KOs, and get the most assists be at the top of these leaderboards relative to the rest of the team. So at the top, you have Basket Legion F at 45.5, extremely high. Makes sense. Legion F has been in almost every game that Logan has played thus far this season and has carried the brunt of the weight in terms of KOs. Cleavor comes in at 2nd at 44.1 for Lava Ridge. Zoroark H comes in at 41.8% for Alfrenada. For the same reason, been in virtually every game, gotten most of the KOs. And then tied at 41%, Slowbro for Verbank and Ursaluna for New Bark, again by virtue of playing in basically every game and being the KO leaders for their team. So you're going to see those Mons typically rule the usage rate charts. And this is also a stat that doesn't really change too much barring a trade or something weird. So you're probably going to see most of the same Mons dominate the usage rate charts all season long. We move on to a very active free agent week. A lot of moves are being made, way more than in week 2. At the start, you have Akala Island swapping out Rabska for Avalon H. Rabska didn't get any playing time. The prospect of Revival Blessing was cute, but Akala Island opts for a Mon that, at the very least, in a pin situation, can spin and clear hazards. So, it's a PU pick, nothing really crazy. We'll see if it gets any playing time this season. Veilstone opting to swap out Halucha for Iron Leaves. Iron Leaves a bit stronger without boosting, and obviously Veilstone is running the full electric terrain, so really doubling, tripling down on the terrain offense. I think it's a very good decision. The most shocking free decision, not only of this season, but maybe in NWB history, Sunny Shore dropping longtime captain as well as Terra captain Luxray for Sneasel. I'm not entirely sure why Spike opted to do this. Just decided that Luxray didn't really have much of a place on the roster anymore and decides to go for Sneasel, opting for Stab Terra Ice and non-Stab Terra Electric. So, gets that Bolt Beam coverage. We'll see what exactly Spike's plan is. Perhaps he just wanted some more speed on his offense. Very interested in seeing what he does with this. Alfrenada drops Zoroark, realizing that Species Clause means that there's virtually no reason to ever use regular Zoroark, and picks up Grafaiai. Obviously, Grafaiai's got some really interesting utility. It's very, very fast. It's got a decent speed stat, or a decent attack stat, and it's got Prankster. So this mon can do a lot of different things that I think will definitely benefit Alfrenada when Chris gets back into the thick of playing games. New Moon Island sends Pikachu home. Was really here more as a mascot than anything else. Never got any playing time. Realistically, never was going to get playing time. And instead opts for actual utility in Morgrum, which, hey, Prankster screens. That fits Nico's team like a glove. So now you have Yuxi to put up rocks and cause status, Morgrum to put up screens, and then everybody else to do what they've been doing all season, set up and win. So I like that decision from New Moon. Veilstone, not done with the week, opts to get rid of Articuno G for Forges. Articuno G was more of a setup sweeper than it is anything else, but it was hard to fit on the team. Psychic and Flying is not a very good combination, so it was hard to put it on. Find a set where it really went to work. And instead opts for Forges, which provides some very, very, very good special defensive bulk. So I think that's a very good move by Veilstone. Now, we also had some trades this week. Trades open up for week 2, and we saw some pretty major moves. First off, Lava Ridge and Lavender Town opting to swap UU picks. Moltres G for Screamtail. That gives Lavender Town some more offense. It seems like Logan wants to go full offensive. And it gives Lava Ridge a Photosynthesis mon on a team that already had Torkoal and Walking Wake. And Screamtail is already a very good defensive mon, even without the sun. So we're starting to see Lava Ridge lean into that sun offense. And it has Tauros, Paldean, and Blaze as well. So that, I think, is definitely a big trade for them. And still a fairly decent trade for Lavender Town if that's the direction that they want to go in. I cannot blame them for making that swap, but I think this is really big for Lava Ridge. Our second 1-for-1 trade was, again, featuring Lavender Town. Wasn't done on the week. Sends Espeon to Humalau for Azelf. So again, really wanted to focus on offense. Big one here, Azelf was a Terra captain for Humalau. And decides, nah, I would rather have the Magic Bounce utility of Espeon and, a little less frail. Opted to make it Terra Psychic, obviously, as its only stab. And then its non-Terra stab being Fairy type, which makes sense, obviously, to help cover for Dark types and such. Fairy Psychic, very good type combination, can never go wrong with that. And then lastly, the big trade of the week, Humalau also was not done. Orchestrates a massive trade with Verbank, sending 2 mons on each side. We haven't seen that since Season 2. I believe this is only the second time we've ever seen it at all. Funnily enough, back when it happened in Season 2, it was Humalau and Verbank again. King Gambit and Crogonal for Glamora and Heracross. Koba decided that King Gambit wasn't what his team needed, opted to go for Glamora, which can either A, help free up Ting Lu's moveset by taking care of hazards for it, or B, having a more special offensive presence because Ting Lu is a phenomenal hazard setter in its own right, and perhaps wanting Glamora to get a little bit more active. It has a very strong special attack stat, so can't blame him for that decision. And then Heracross, obviously, very good immediate physical prowess. Scarf Moxie, or Guts with Trailblaze, however you want to do it, Heracross can do some major damage. So I like that decision from Humalau. As for Verbeek, acquiring King Gambit, very interesting decision. More than anything else means that teams will now have to pick between King Gambit and an Amorous Eye for bans. Very reminiscent of Wheezy's team in Season 4, Turnback Renegades, where he employed Melmetal and Kiram, so teams really had to pick their poison as far as one of those two. So I respect and like this trade a lot for both teams. And then Cryogonal, you know, decent spinner, good Spadef, not that bad of a mon. That being said, Cryogonal did not last long on Verbank's roster. Verbank immediately sending it home for Lurantis. Would rather have Lurantis as the hazard clearance. And I guess contrary, Leaf Storm is a pretty cute idea too. Verbank just didn't really want Cryogonal at all, but needed something to make the trade with Humala happen, so it is what it is. Lavender Town, wasting no time, immediately drops Articuno for Cryogonal. Cryogonal, better special bulk. Not as good physically bulky, but if nothing else, if it's forced to lose its item or run something that isn't boots, taking 25% is still better than taking 50. Articuno basically had to run boots, so that's really, really rough. Whereas Cryogonal can deal with special moves a little bit better, and is a bit stronger, I believe, as well. So, Lava Ridge opting to get rid of Dragality for Staraptor, just going full in on the offense. I like that move a lot. I think Staraptor is a very good mon. I was surprised that it stayed in the free, as a free agent for as long as it did, but now it is on a roster. New Moon Island swapping out Palisand for Tatsugiri, really, really, really buckling down on the setup sweeper, and having some hazard control back in the game. Tatsugiri can rapid spin, and then it's gonna plot, and if you don't resist Water Dragon, hey, Tatsugiri can punch some holes too. One of the best free agency moves all season, Lentamaz getting rid of Decidueye H for Mousehold as an EX swap. As far as strictly hazard control, Mousehold probably better. Tidy Up not only getting rid of hazards with boosting speed and attack, and then obviously what Mousehold does next. That population bomb is going to hurt if you are not a steel type or if you don't have a Rocky Helmet. So I really, really like this move from Lentamaz Town. And then lastly, Humalau getting rid of another Terramon in Zangoose. Just didn't really like what it was putting up. Wasn't impressed by its performance in a few games this week and decided this isn't the mon, and instead goes to Skuntank. Skuntank being Terra Stab Dark and non-Stab Terra Flying. Makes sense. Poison Dark. It's a very good type combination, only weak to ground, so you cover that by just having Terra Flying. One last free agency move that was not on the graphic just because it happened over the course of 2 weeks. In week 1, Humalau released Swalot. Just never thought it was going to get used, so just gets rid of it. Instead, opts for Kricketune and has it as a Terra Captain. Stab Bug, non-Stab Ghost. Makes sense because it's going to be a sticky web setter, and Terra Ghost makes sense to block Rapid Spin. So, and then lastly, we take a look at the upcoming week. Same deal as in week 2. Every team has 2 interleague matchups and 2 intra-league matchups. Some pretty interesting matchups on the table. You got Veilstone and Treasure Town, 2 teams that are looking to call back into that playoff hunt. Over in the Sapphire League, some interesting matches. Mount Hokulani's got Lavender Town. A big one in Mali City and Humalau. That's 2 and 3 in the Ruby League or Sapphire League right now. So that's going to be big for playoff positioning. And then obviously Interleague is always interesting because you get to see a clash of styles. You got Mali City and Lava Ridge, New Moon Island and Verbank. Some really, really, really cool sets on deck. As for Versus Seeker, the schedule that we have as of right now, Veilstone and Treasure Town will play. Again, jockeying for that playoff position. Verbank and Mount Hokulani, top seed in Sapphire League right now versus Verbank. We'll see if Dom's coaching can net Muffin that massive, massive win. Muffin has never beaten Kami in a legitimate set in 7 attempts, so this would be huge if Muffin can score a win here. And then Lentamaz Town and Lavender Town going head-to-head. As for most interesting matches of the week that I believe, Over in the Ruby League, you have Lava Ridge and Akala Island. Lava Ridge been on a bit of a sputter, started 3-0, had a 1-3 week. If they are able to knock off Akala Island, that would be a huge win for them to get them back on track. Obviously, Akala Island sits alone at the top of Ruby League, so if they can get a win on Lava Ridge, that would further their dominance over the Ruby League, especially because they've only lost one set in division, and that being the Sunny Shore. Over in Sapphire, you have Verbank and New Barktown, 2 teams sitting at 3 and 4. Again, there are a lot of teams vying for playoff position. That 4, 5, 6 spot are all occupied by 3 and 4 teams, and obviously that means that one of them would have to miss the playoffs. So 2, 3, and 4 teams going head to head is the definition of vying for playoff positioning. And then lastly, what I think is a really interesting interleague matchup being Mali City and Treasure Town. Kevin has gotten off to, I think, the best start of his tenure in any NWBA season at 5-1-1. Zebby 3 and 4, had a rough week, but still a good GM. This one more about being a clash of styles. Zedby has Roaring Moon, Reggie Drago, Toxtricity teams that are going to blow your team apart. But Kevin's team is extremely bulky, so I think that's going to be a really interesting dynamic when those two play, and we'll see who comes out on top in that matchup. That being said, that will wrap up this week's episode of the NWBA Wonder Room. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Thank you for all the support, all the views and likes and subscribes on YouTube, all the views and such on Twitch. Really do appreciate it. We will be back next week, obviously. And, next week we'll be halfway through the season, so we'll have a lot to talk about. Really interested in seeing tonight's matches. Really interested in seeing how this week's matches play out all across the board. So once again, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more NWBA content coming your way.